What kinds of things will be learned during this exact project?
That you're such good collection developers that...
A lot of the data we'll get is geared towards sort of the strengths and weaknesses of your collection, and suggestions to purchase new things, or maybe where you can weed will be part of that. They compare your data against other libraries that are your same size nationwide, and I think it's even international.
Yeah, international.
Yeah. So it's a lot of data comparison. I don't want to get into too many of the details because I don't want to promise something that then turns out we can't do because of the nature of our data consortium. So,
if everything works as we expect, those reports in conjunction with the collection development workshops that we'll be putting on should give those libraries a clear path forward for how to continue developing their collection. And then once we've gotten through the project, then that is a service we would hope to open up.
And look at requesting data, hold data, that kind of stuff.
So while the training and collection HQ will be for the pilot libraries, this is somewhat of a question for Cheryl. The workshop will be for everybody.
Yeah.
So we're doing, correct?
Yeah, the workshop.
The workshop's on collection development, because we all can have a reminder about how you do selection well.
It's for everyone.
Or how we do it today as opposed to 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or review it, whatever.
Is that all you did?
Stars. It's all about stars.
Are there any other questions for Donovan on the technology report?
Yes, it is.
If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and committee composition and terms.
So when we looked at terms last time, Tyler had a handy-dandy chart that he had created. You offered some support. There were a number of you who very generously said if I decided that we would reduce and do away with alternates, you would graciously step down. And in the end, this committee has seemed to have worked well for a good number of years because we have the variety of library voices. The idea when the board first created, and this is an unusual committee in that the other committees that are librarian makeup, with the exception of the SELCO Advisory Committee that is created by law, and the SELCO Library Directors Committee, which is created by bylaws, this is the only other librarian committee that is actually created by the board. Other committees like the ebook content or VIP services, those other committees that we have had, whether they be standing or ad hoc, have been created and appointed by me. So this is actually a board committee, a board-appointed, board-created committee. So when we created it, the idea was that we would have these elected representatives who would actually be there to represent their type of library, whether it was big or small, school or public, and would actually be soliciting input from the groups that they represented. And the idea was that we wanted to make sure that there were a sufficient number of people there all of the time to be able to enhance the alternates. As we discussed the last time, that seems not to necessarily be needed quite so much. But we do have, because of the federated nature of this region, we have, I don't know that I want to say that there are 90 different libraries with 90 different ways of doing things, but it gets real close. So rather than ask people to leave the committee, I am recommending to you that we simply make everybody elected, or who has been elected to this committee, a regular voting member. So it wouldn't be that suddenly James is here today and Sherry is here today and Pat is here today and Pat can't vote because Pat's an alternate, but rather we would move forward and the 3 mediums would be 3 mediums and the 3 larges would be 3 larges and the 3 schools would be 3 schools. Because of some, and I take responsibility for this, for not having let a ballot at some point but the terms, the board specifically wanted staggered terms so that everybody whose knowledge, if everyone stayed for their maximum amount, that all of the knowledge of the committee would not leave at the same time. And that got off. It got off really, really off. And then we had like 5 or 6 people who were all going to be done with the third of their 3-year terms, and 5 people would be going off this committee in the same year. And that isn't good for your libraries, it isn't good for this committee, it isn't good for the libraries you represent. So Tyler and I sort of played with the colors, and I'm proposing if those of you who are in a term are willing, that since this is not, this one, unlike a board, which is 3 3-year terms is set in statute, we can modify this as I would recommend to the board, that we simply move some of you to a 4th year. So we don't lose the knowledge base that we have. So as you can see, we end up with, if you look at the steps, you can see that different people are going off the board in every year. So my recommendation is that we would change, first off, all the alternates to voting members, that we change the terms sufficiently to make sure that everybody is staggered. The black dots, the black spots are vacancies right now, where we called for nominations and no one was nominated, and that we would correct that this fall, hopefully. And then the other change, it has always seemed to me that when the board created this committee, they were adamant that the SELCO staff needed to be voting members of this committee because we are paying the majority of the money, and that this committee was to advise me. And it always seemed odd to me that I was a voting member of a committee that was advising me. Just seemed a little too and as I went back through the minutes of these meetings, there have been some roll call votes, but the closest vote that we've ever had has been 8-3, and the 3 votes were not the SELCO staff. So it's not even that the SELCO staff ever were the, we're going to vote in a block against all of you. We really do try to vote our conscience. But I am going to recommend, assuming that you accept this recommendation from me today, I would recommend to the board that we go to 2 voting members by SELCO staff, and that we continue the idea that this group would advise me on the operation, but I not be a voting member.
Yeah, I have a question about all that. Looking at this stuff, it has seemed, the structure of this committee in many ways seemed very confusing to me, and for some of the reasons that you've already outlined, that we're advising someone who is a voting member. But the charge of this committee that I was looking at actually says that we're advising SELCO staff and the Technology Policy Committee, not the Executive Director. And I'm not trying to parse words here, but I need some clarification on how that all came about and how that's, because that's the actual charge of the committee. And
I'm jumping to the bylaws and my responsibility. So you're right. Technically, your charge is to advise the SELCO staff, but ultimately, the SELCO staff reports to me.
Sure, sure, and I understand that. I mean, okay, who's advising who, but at the same token, by that logic, why are SELCO staff voting members at all on this committee? Because for the same reasons, because then they're voting to advise you when you're supervising them. Seems like it just, the whole thing seems really strange to me. And the fact that when we do make votes, the technology policy members are also voting to advise themselves, to advise the board.
The intent was not that the technology committee, the technology committee members would vote. I know over the years we have counted them. We have not ever counted the technology policy members, in this case, John or Charlie, when we needed a quorum. It seemed easier just to let everybody vote and know that because again, we've never had any votes where it needed to make a difference, because they were really here as liaisons. And as you know, we have, with Charlie and John, we have pretty good attendance. We have had years where the board members have never been in attendance at this meeting. So.
It just, yes, it's
The
very,
reason
it's very
that
confusing to me, the history and then kind of the way it's laid out and the way we meet jointly, and so I just, that's fine.
The reason for meeting jointly, and I will be very candid, is that there was a sense of distrust that members of the library community did not believe that SELCO staff would bring an accurate representation of this group's discussion to the board. And so there were board members here to hear the discussion, to be able to say that when the SELCO staff brought something forward, that indeed that is what the discussion was. So, I'm hoping that maybe we have moved beyond that sense of us and them, and the sense that every time a SELCO staff member gives a report to the board, there is something to be suspect of. But the reason that the board asked to have a technology policy committee created and that they met jointly was because the public library directors that were on this committee did not trust SELCO staff.
And it's not, that doesn't mean that it's a bad check and balance. Maybe that's too bad. It's sad that was the reason, but it isn't necessarily a bad outcome.
No, I'm not suggesting that the technology policy committee go back to, originally the technology policy was going to meet intermittently with this committee, and I think that becomes way too hard for board members who, one, already are not dealing with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, and then to say to you, oh, by the way, come every fourth meeting, when this group has continued to have its discussions, it would be unfair to the board members who are willing to give up their time. So I would much rather have them here, and I would much rather have them available at the board meeting to add the citizen input.
I guess one thing I would like to see out of this discussion of the composition is more of a general focus on what this committee's role in the organization. I feel like with the strategic plan, this particular committee was in many ways left out of it in terms of, there's a lot of movement forward about you want member libraries to be engaged with SELCO, and I think that's very important, and I guess I'd like to see this. I think we need to look at our role again, not just the composition, but what our function is, because I feel like just some of these things we talked about, there's some confusion, maybe just because I haven't been around since the history of this, but as to what we should be doing and how we should be advising.
We can certainly look at the committee charts as well. I don't think we put that on the agenda today.
Well, we are talking about the automation contract, and I'm not jumping ahead here, but there was a writer in that contract that actually laid out the specific responsibilities and duties of this committee, and that writer, it was writer D, is actually been taken out of the new contract. So I thought maybe that's something that we can look at as well as part of.
No, no, I'm looking at my contract, my new contract, and Donovan and I are looking at each other going, it wasn't our intent to take it out.
Actually, you haven't been on that one meeting. I believe you said you were going to take that because you felt that it stood alone as part of the documentation for the committee rather than in the automation contract.
Oh, that's right. Because we have changed the composition of this committee when it used to be 3 large and 2 mediums and an alternate, or 2 large and an alternate, and 1 medium and an alternate. And technically, it was in the contract, and so we should have changed the contract. So thank you, Tyler, because Donovan and I both forgot that. So the intent was not to change the makeup of this committee by not including it in the contract, but rather to allow this committee to be more flexible and not have to change the 5-year, hopefully, a new 5-year document every 5 years. With every library, 90 times. So it was not an intention to say the committee wasn't going to exist, not after having spent all this time. And as you can see, Tyler is making out projections to 16.
Well, no, certainly not. I just, that I like the old Rider D because it had some of these things that I think fit in well with the strategic plan, like, participate in technology planning process. I mean, I think that we should look at some of these things that we've been historically charged with.
And that is still in the charge.
Okay, because there was no charge with, I couldn't find, I found the little blurb of the charge on the website.
Yeah.
But there's no, I know I've seen different iterations of this where it talks about tasks and things, so.
Your charge has not changed very much from Rider D. If it's all of the committee charges, the intention was to put the charge on the website. If that one didn't get put there,
I think it got streamlined because we were trying to streamline a lot of this information.
Well, but see that.
So
there's the little blurb, but if you look at tech policy, they've actually got the full.
Yeah.
The intention when we redid the website was to right up front put a blurb, but then to have a link to the full charge. So somehow in the January migration, that one got missed. So we can fix it because there is an actual committee charge that this committee edited. There was one that was created initially and approved by this committee or accepted by this committee, and it's been revised once that I remember.
Okay. That's an, yeah.
And it's on the technology policy committee,
Yeah.
what you're just saying there, so it's just getting
So big note in the minutes, add ILS off job description.
Yep.
Which does not mean it can't be changed. It just means that we need to post it and then this committee needs to look at it. So we can bring that to you at your next meeting. We can bring that back to you in August.
I just feel like in many ways these all tie together and we should be kind of looking at them.
Another
Time.
thing that I was looking for because I didn't remember the change of the chair. It doesn't tell you who the chair is on this. Like there's no in parentheses afterwards.
Actually there is.
Is there?
There's a whole members chart that lists everyone.
does it say who the chair is?
Not on there.
It's not on there. Update that site after we
I don't
elected
think it says who the chair is.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so we'll add, Ann, did you find this roster?
I found this, but it didn't help. It didn't answer the two questions I had,
Which was,
which was, I wonder who the chair is now, because before, but I did that before I sent you the email about something else, and yeah.
So it's good to be part of the committee where no one knows who the chair is, and you're the chair.
You've only been the chair for, I don't know exactly, but.
Co-chair.
So, but yeah, the charge. So what,
Yep.
what's the, yeah.
so do you want to, as long as you've got that up, Donovan, do you want to go to tech policy? That was the intent there, and I'm guessing that we don't have Charlie down as co-chair there.
No, you do have that.
So this would be the model that we list the members and we list who's chair. And then if you take a look at the link, Technology Policy Committee Charge, it links you to a PDF. And there is a similar document for ILS.
Do we have the election always at the same time?
Yes.
And so we could easily repeat, that could just be standing on our agenda, is that the next meeting following the election, we review the committee charge.
That would be great because the election is in November and the new people start in January. While it does not coincide with our fiscal year, it coincides with all of your fiscal year, and it coincides with the calendar year, which makes doing terms really easy.
It reminds everybody what we're all supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It would not be difficult for us to, if you want, I can have Sarah go print the copies of the charge. I know where it is.
Well, it sounds like there might be enough to talk about.
Yeah, could we just get a copy of that just to see? I mean, we don't have to talk about it today, but it'd be nice to look at.
Okay.
I mean,
Talk among yourselves while I go tell her to print the copy. What do you want for dinner? Without direct justice here.
I think anyone is invited.
I'm trying to drag this meeting on so that we'll just be too tired and we'll just get used to ongoing.
I have to be dragging it. I don't have to eat the bird.
I thought I heard
But while Anne's doing that, let's talk, do we have any comments specifically about the proposal to change the actual committee and the alternates?
So you actually, yeah, you're actually going to 3 of each one, is that
Yeah.
right? Not having alternate at all, but the intention is.
Except for the special academic, they'll have 2.
That has never been filled.
Right. I know.
We're looking to get one.
So, yeah.
I have to say my one concern is we've always seemed to have at least one alternate position vacant. And I think it might be very difficult to be filling 3.
Well, James, that was what I was thinking about that too, and I wonder if perhaps 4. No longer being an alternate will solve the problem. If maybe being the alternate is the hurdle, that just sort of feels extraneous. Yeah.
redheaded stepchild.
I think that to me, I don't have any issue with the number of voting members that SELCO has at this point, as long as we're adding one from library, which we are. So we're adding 3 library votes and doing away with 1, right?
Right.
So to me, that acceptable, because I've always been concerned about that. So I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, at this point, the ratio has changed.
But like Ann says, are we going to be actually able to fill that many?
Well, you know, I think really the only when times they're boring, no, but when times they're exciting,
Then they will. Okay.
Depends on who depends on who's ever been on this.
I think sometimes people are just hesitant to be an alternate because you're.
What?
It's a personal.
Yeah, it's kind of like.
Thank you very much. But you have taken it upon yourself to be as active as
alternate.
I call Peggy every time and say, "Are you going to show up, Peggy?" You do not. So, that's what I'm saying. I had already started revising this.
We'll revise.
And forgot. So, now we incumbent upon the alternate.
So you pulled this off the website at one time, but then started modifying it in Word.
No.
No.
It's a Word document.
Ah.
It's the Word document that would have been approved by the board in July of 2008 was on the old SELCO website, and somehow in the movement of the website in January, this did not get added, like technology policy.
Yep. So I have never seen this before, in my case, because I'm new.
Because you would not have been there in
Okay,
2008.
all right.
So then, knowing that we were changing,
good enough,
and
thank you all.
I was going to recommend changing the number of people on the committee, I grabbed the charge and started editing it. So anything in red is the changes that I was suggesting. Thank you. So, as you will see, the original charge, at least, or the revised charge back in 2008 that the board approved was the ILS Operations Committee will report to the SELCO Executive Director, and I feel uncomfortable you don't report to me. So I'd already changed that. So, and I didn't want, assuming that you would recommend or that we would discuss as a recommendation to change the number of individuals serving on the committee, that we would delete any reference to alternates. There has been some question in the past as to, why are Tyler and Cheryl here? And they're here because they bring a level of technical expertise that maybe Donovan or Michael and I do not have, because they're doing some of the deep into the weeds nitty-gritty, and therefore can answer questions like the rooms are not just connections to titles in the database, but rather HTML code. Again, deleting any reference to alternates, clarifying the relationship, or at least trying to clarify the relationship of ILS ops and tech policy, and then a list of some tasks. And then with the idea that we would have the idea was, back when I worked on this weeks and months ago, was that it would be in part of this packet, which I forgot to tell Tyler about, and that it would go to the board in July. So.
And it can be revised or changed whenever the need arises, right?
Correct. But since this is a board-created committee, I feel obligated to take it back to the board.
I know that myself, I'm not very good at seeing something and then coming to complete conclusions about something all right away. I'm a slower thinker than that, so I would ask for some time.
That's fine, because as I said, my intent was to have it in the packet that would have gone out last week, and I totally forgot that I'd even done the work. Sometimes working on stuff well ahead of the schedule is not a good thing. Better to leave it to the last minute.
Well, I agree with Ann Wilkinson. We could maybe just put this aside and put it on the agenda for the next meeting. This particular piece of it. Do you still want movement today on the committee composition? Is that going to be an actionable item?
If you want to go ahead and move on the composition, I will take that to the July board so that the board actually knows that this committee has grown in size and why. And then we can, and I can tell them that we are looking at the chart as an outgrowth of the discussion about committee composition. I don't think it has to be done at the same time. And then that way we can get people their right name tags, and then the chart that if you agree with this recommendation for people, and if the people who are in a 3-year term and are willing to do a 4-year term agree, then Tyler can clean up the website to make sure that it is accurate. So the next time Ann goes out and looks, she'll not only know who's chair, but she'll know who's on what committee for how long.
And the board decided on the maximum number of years?
The board decided on the maximum number of years because it was,
It's 9 now.
It's 9 now because that coincides with board terms and state law. But because it's not a statutory created body, it would not have to be.
But we're fine with that.
You could make it less. You could recommend more. I think more might be a little bit long.
I think turnover is really important. You know, that I'm going to be going off, and I think that that's probably a really good idea. If I could stay on, would I? Yes, because I love it. That it's good for the organization. No.
If you have a limit of 9 years, is that going to cause a problem for alternates who become real ones whose terms have been extended a year?
No.
Wouldn't that be 10 eventually?
Well, I'm saying that since this committee is not bound by statute, and while we technically follow Robert's Rules of Order, because bylaws say that we will, when bylaws does not say how we will act, we will follow Robert's Rules of Order, but terms are terms. So I think as long as this group is recommending that, yep, for these 2 people it might be 10, and if I'm recommending it, unless some of the rest of you or your colleagues would go back to their board rep and say, no, I don't want this, I think the board will be fine with it. You've got 2 board members who are here that will have heard the discussion.
Okay to me.
Well, I'll make a motion that we accept the new configuration of the committee as submitted.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
In the spirit of the new composition, I will not vote. That's okay. You have to vote this time. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
get, until we pass it, it's still, and the alternates still can't vote until we pass it.
All right. You could obtain.
Aye, loudly.
There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those in all those opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Okay, I will take a recommendation to the board that we have changing, we're going with a new configuration and that the committee is looking at its charge.